Welcome everybody to our second lecture in this series of what has gone wrong with the world. And in this second lecture, I want to look at the religions and philosophies of this world. The religions and philosophies of this world are attempts which human beings have made in different ways and at different times to solve the problems that the world faces. Now, the intention, of course, is very good. People who have produced these various answers to the human dilemma have done so because they realize that there is something wrong and that they believe that it is possible to put it right. As Christians, we sympathize with that. We understand that there is indeed something wrong in the world. We agree on that point, and we agree also that we ought to have a desire to do something about it. We are not happy with people who accept the world as it is and see no need to change anything or to improve anything. So in that sense, we are happy to go along with this. However, we do not agree with the solutions which have been proposed. We do not accept that what human beings devise in their own minds, that these things are the answer to the dilemmas that we face. And why not? Well, basically, the reason is that the problems of the world, what has gone wrong with the world, these problems are basically spiritual in nature. They are not material. They are not physical. They are not things that are within the competence of the human mind to resolve. So what we are trying to do, what the human race is trying to do, is solve a problem, but without adequate material, without adequate ability to do this. And this is the difficulty. You see, the intentions may be very good, but the results will fail because the tools, the means for achieving the end are inadequate. Well, the first thing, of course, that we need to say is that in their different ways, every human being wants to find a meaning in life. This is something which is given to us and is not given to any other creature. Even creatures that have minds, like animals, for example, do not sit about wondering what the meaning of their existence is. They are not trying to solve this question. So we have to say that this is a fundamental difference between human beings and every other creature. We might even say that it's a difference between human beings and angels, because although angels are capable of sinning, and we know that some have done so, they understand what they have done. They realize the consequences. They are not sitting around wondering what to do about it. They don't have this dilemma, this problem in their life. So it is, in this sense, unique to human beings. But having said that, it is an eternal quest, which extends really to every human being. Now, there may be some people who pay more attention to it than others. Of course, not everybody sits around thinking some very abstract or developed philosophy. That we know. But although there may be many people who just get on with life, who carry on their lives without giving very much thought to these things, Nevertheless, somewhere deep down inside, everybody wants to know that their life has a meaning, that there is some purpose in existence. They do not accept that life is completely meaningless, that there is no point in doing anything. You see, they want to know why they are here, what they are for, what is the value of what they do. Everybody wants to make sense of the world in which we live. And this is a very complicated question. Of course, if there are no real problems, if we are healthy and we have a job and we can work and earn a living and so on, then we are not too bothered about this, perhaps, in the way that we live most of the time. Life seems to make sense on an everyday basis. But, of course, that is not enough, because we all know that at different times in our lives something will go wrong. Some tragedy will come into our life and make us ask questions. Sometimes people fall ill, they get sick, and they don't know why. Sometimes people lose their job or lose their way of life, and they don't understand that either. Then, of course, all of us, sooner or later, lose members of our family. We lose our parents. We lose people who are close to us. And we don't understand why this is so. Why is it that people are taken away from us in this way? And very often the sense that we try to make of these things, of our life, this all fails. It all breaks down because we get to the point where we cannot answer. We don't have the answer to the problems that we have. Now, having said that, all human beings, whoever they are, have some kind of philosophy of life. It may be very simple. It may simply be that a man will say, well, I go to work, I mind my own business, I pay my taxes, I stay out of trouble, that's the best way to live. It may be a very simple answer to complex problems, but for that person, it is enough. You see, that person has decided, this is what I need to do, this is how I need to live, and I'm going to carry on in this way and hope for the best. So whether it is simple or complicated, you see, everybody has worked out in their own mind how to survive. What is the best policy for them? Now, most people, of course, cannot express this very clearly, and perhaps that's just as well. We don't really need a great many individual philosophies of life that are not very inspiring and do not make very much sense. But there are some people, of course, who pursue this to a much higher level. There are some people who have very developed conception of their life and what it should be, and who try to influence others to accept these solutions. You see, they preach to other people. They suggest ways of dealing with things, and many people who have not thought these questions through for themselves, who have not really gone into this in great depth, many of these people will accept this. They'll say, well, I haven't really thought this through for myself, but this other person has done this, has gone into this in much greater detail than I have, so I will accept his wisdom, I will accept his knowledge, I will accept his suggestions. And it is in this way, of course, that philosophies, religions, and other movements of different kinds gain influence. Some of them are very influential indeed. Others are just passing phenomena that don't last very long. But whether they are world-changing religions or whether they are just temporary solutions or attempts to solve particular difficulties, it doesn't really matter because the underlying factor is the same. It is a human attempt to solve a mystery, which is the mystery of what is wrong with the world. Now, as Christians, we say, these attempts may be sincere, they may be well-meaning, and occasionally, who knows, they may even come up with some positive answers to particular problems. But we say, without revelation, without a message from outside ourselves, all our search for meaning is just guessing. It's speculation. We don't know. The only way to resolve the world's problems, to find the key to answer, is to go to the source. And the source is God. God, who created us, is the only one who can tell us what the meaning of our life is. God has created us. I've said this many times, but I'll say it again. God has created us in his image and in his likeness, which means that he has created us with the ability to understand and to accept what the solution is. You see, we are capable of understanding it. We are capable of receiving it, but we are not capable of inventing it for ourselves. That's the difference. You see, we can't make it up. I can't sit here and produce answers to the problem out of my own head. I have to go to the source. I have to go to the one who has told me who I am, what I am, why I am here, and how I can resolve the difficulties which I face in my life. Now, this may seem rather strange and hard to accept, but actually it is inevitable when we are talking about personal relationships. All personal relationships, whether they are human or whether they are relationship with God, all personal relationships depend on revelation. What do I mean? Well, let me take an example. I can look at other people and I can guess in my mind what they are like. It's relatively easy for me to decide whether another person is old or young, whether another person is male or female. This kind of thing is not difficult to decide. If I see someone who is of a different skin color to me, let us say, for example, I see a black person, I may say to myself, this person probably comes from Africa or somewhere like that. I can guess this, you see, by looking at them. But of course, I don't know anything about them for sure. And the only way I can find out is by asking them. You see, let us say I see a black man standing at a bus stop, and I want to know who he is and where he's from. Now, I can go to that person, I can go up to that person, and I can say to him, I see you are a black person, you must come from Africa. But then he might turn to me and say, no, I come from the United States. I'm a black American. And I did not know that. I did not know that until he told me this, you see. Now, I might have imagined in my mind all kinds of things about this person. You see, I might have created a whole fantasy in my imagination of who he is and what he's like, and made all kinds of assumptions about him, which are false, because although there's an element of truth in what I have perceived, I mean, it's not as if I have seen something, I've seen something that doesn't exist. I have seen a real person. I have drawn the wrong conclusions based on reasonable assumptions. I mean, it's not unreasonable to assume that a black person should come from Africa. This is normal, and many of them do. So you can understand why I would say this, but still I am wrong, and I can be proved wrong if this person speaks to me. Now, it's very important that we understand this, because, of course, if I operate on the basis of my own imagination, then I can go very wrong. If I say, for example, all black people come from Africa, Africa has terrible diseases which spread around the world. Therefore, black people are more likely than others to be carriers of these diseases. Therefore, I should avoid black people because they are probably going to be carrying diseases from Africa. And I should not allow a black person to come near me, to come into my house or even into my country because of this, you see, because of the danger that this poses. I can invent a whole series of things that seem to be reasonable to me. I can justify this way of thinking, and I can point to facts which might support this in some way. That it's not entirely unreasonable to think like this, but it is completely wrong because I have not taken into consideration the details of who this person is. I've just given an example. I may be completely wrong from the beginning in my initial assumption about who that person is or what that person is like. Now, I've taken, of course, a rather obvious example, extreme example, you might say, but something similar is, of course, true of all of us. You see, I might see somebody and think all kinds of strange things about them, which turn out to be false. But I'm just guessing by looking at them. I say, well, it looks to me, this man is very fat, so he probably eats the wrong things. He needs to go on a diet, he needs to see a doctor, he needs to do something about this. This is wrong. And I may not have any understanding at all about the reasons why he is like that. There may be explanations of which I have no knowledge, but I am already deciding in my mind what to do about that person, how to treat that person, because I am guessing on the basis of my own knowledge, more general knowledge, of what must apply to this particular individual whom I see in front of me. Now, this, of course, is much more dangerous when it comes to thinking about God, because a lot of people think about God in this way. They imagine what God must be like. if there is a God, if there's someone who rules the universe in the way that we claim, then he must be all-powerful, he must be good, he must be loving, he must be all sorts of things like this. And we invent a picture of the God, you see, that we believe must exist. Now, in some ways, and sometimes, these guesses may be correct. If somebody comes up to us and says, well, if there's a God, he must be good, no Christian will deny this. We will say, yes, of course, there is a God and he is good. And we agree with this. But, of course, we have to press this a little bit further, because the person then might say, well, if there is a God and he is good, then this good God will kill all my enemies. I have lots of enemies, people who don't like me, people who are causing trouble for me. And if God is good and I pray to him and I accept his goodness, then he will manifest this by killing them. In other words, by doing what I want, you see, to make my life easier. And at this point, of course, Christians will have to stand back and say, wait a minute, that's not the kind of goodness that we are talking about. God is good, but that does not mean that he just does whatever you want him to do. That God does not necessarily agree with you about what what good is. You see, he's not going to be governed in his mind by what you want and what you think is a right and good thing for him to do. And so here, you see, we start finding ourselves in problems, in difficulties of various kinds, because people who start with a principle which in one way is good, it may even be true up to a point, it is not controlled by definitions of what goodness is, and therefore, of course, we don't agree. We end up with a position where we have to say, well, I'm sorry, but the God we worship as Christians is different from this. It's not what you think of as a good God. So from your point of view, our God is not the sort of God that you would like to have. You want something else from the God who really exists. Now, of course, when we are dealing with other human beings, if I'm wrong, if I guess something about you, and it's wrong, there are one of two options. You can say, I can say, well, you've told me that my guess, what I think is true, is wrong, so I accept that. You see, I accept that I was wrong, that I made a mistake, and you must tell me who you are, what you are like, and then I will adjust my way of thinking in order to meet this condition, in order to meet your situation, so that I have a right perspective of who you are and of what you are like. That is one possible way through. The other thing, of course, I can do is simply to ignore this and say, well, you tell me these things about you, but I don't believe you, and you may think this, but I think differently, and I'm just not going to pay any attention to this. You see, I'm going to carry on thinking the way I think, whether you like it or not. And of course, if that happens, then no real relationship is possible, or at least the relationship that we have is going to be bad, because it is not based on revelation. It is not based on the access and source to truth. Now, you might say, of course, that the person I'm dealing with, the person who explains himself or herself to me, is not telling the truth. They may say something about themselves which I suspect is wrong. And in human life, with human beings, this is almost always inevitable because none of us understands ourselves fully. I can explain to you why I think this or why I do that, but I may be wrong in this, you see, or at least I do not have a full understanding of why I do certain things and why I don't do other things. Why not? Well, because I'm finite, I'm a limited human being, I'm a sinful human being, I have a distorted picture of myself. I can't honestly claim to understand myself perfectly or even very well. But when we are talking about God, it's a completely different story. God knows himself. God knows what he is like. God does not have any problem in understanding himself. And so when God explains to us who he is and what he is like, then what he says is true. What he says is true because he knows who he is. He knows what he has done. He knows what he expects us to believe about him. And so a divine revelation, a revelation that comes from God, cannot be questioned in the same way. It can, of course, be rejected, and many people do reject it. They don't want to know the truth. They don't want to meet the God who has made them. They are in rebellion. But that is a different thing. You see, to put our own mind, our own thinking, our own assumptions ahead of revelation, to say to God, no, you're wrong. Your explanation about your purposes and what you are doing, I don't like it. I think you are wrong. I'm going to carry on with my own ideas, with what I think you should be doing, not what you think. Then, of course, no real relationship is possible. We have some kind of relationship, I suppose you would have to say, but it is a relationship of disobedience. It is a relationship which is false because it is not based on the right principles. And of course, we see this very often in human life. You see people who have the wrong idea about God, and they are not prepared to put it right. They don't want to know. They don't want their assumptions, their way of thinking to be challenged by the evidence, by the existence of the other person. In fact, they don't really want revelation at all. They are much more comfortable with their own fantasies. They would rather that God said nothing about himself. They don't want to hear this because it might upset the ideas which they have already worked out for themselves in their own minds. And this we don't want. Now, one of the big difficulties here, and I've already mentioned this, is that sometimes people can guess things about God that turn out to be right. They're not necessarily totally wrong about everything. But this is very dangerous. Because if you happen to guess, let's say that God is good, and you have some idea, some correct idea of what goodness is, that goodness is, say, loving other people or something like that, you might think this, you might come up with this idea. But if this idea is just something that you have guessed, it's something that has emerged by chance rather than on the basis of any real evidence, and certainly not on the basis of revelation, it's not very stable or very reliable. In fact, it's a form of gambling, because you know how sometimes people they go to the casino and they gamble. And there is something which is called beginner's luck. You know, the first time they go, somehow or other they're lucky. They just happen to press the right button, or they do the right thing, and suddenly, completely unexpectedly to them, they make a lot of money, say. You know, they earn a lot of money. They didn't know it was going to happen. It just happened, and they're very surprised by this. You see, they found the right answer somehow. So what happens? Very often, people like that think, well, I've done it once, I'll do it again. And of course they try a second time, but the second time it doesn't work. And we know how this happens, that the person who starts off with a lucky break, who happens to succeed the first time, may end up losing everything, because they keep thinking to themselves, well, I was right. You see, I did the right thing. And I'm just going to carry on doing it. I'm going to carry on pushing this, because even though it doesn't work the second time or the third time or the fourth time, there will come another time when it will work, and we'll be back to the beginning, and everything will work out fine. And of course, it's those people that the casino owners love, because they know that they are going to take every penny that this person has, because this person is working on the false assumption that one success will produce complete success in the end. And this is a tragedy when it happens. We must be very careful about this, because there are people whose spiritual experience is of a similar kind. Something happens to them, something they think, and it turns out to be right. And they are convinced that they know the answer. And then they continue on in life like this. But they're never right a second time or a third time. And yet, the belief that they can be right, that they were right at one time, pushes them on. You see, they keep going in this way, thinking that sooner or later things will come back and they will hit the right answer again. And of course, we find that these people are actually harder to deal with than people who just fail all the time. Because they have known success, or at least what to them is success. And so they think it's possible for them to find it again. And we need to be very, very careful about that. Well, all right, those are the principles dealing with the search for meaning in life. You see, the way people go about this. How does it work out in practice? Well, we need to look at this, because there are certain patterns which are common in the main religions and philosophies of this world. And perhaps the most common thing is the principle of sacrifice, of giving up something. This seems to be very common around the world. It is, of course, central to Christianity in a sense, because Jesus Christ offered himself as a sacrifice. So the idea of sacrifice is not strange to us, and I will come back to this in a few minutes. But it is a fact that most religions and ethical systems in the world involve some kind of sacrifice. Now, this may take different forms. It may be giving up something that we have. If, for example, we are rich, we have lots of money or whatever, we may think by giving this up, by giving it away, that somehow we are doing something good, and it is better for us, you see, to not to have to deal with this thing, give it away, and things will go better for us. Now that may not be a very common reaction, but some people do think like this. You see, they think, well, I have a gift of some kind. I am going to use that gift. I'm going to sacrifice that for some higher good, for some better purpose. And there are many very well-meaning people in the world who do this, you see, who think that that is the way ahead, and who believe that this demonstrates their sincerity, that they really want to do the right thing. The difficulty, of course, with this is that sacrifice of this kind is, first of all, usually determined by us, or determined by a system of belief which we have adopted. Very often it will take it is a form of self-discipline. People give up eating, or they fast. They do that because they think that by doing this they show that they are sincere in wanting to put into practice the principles which they claim to believe. Some people will give up living in normal society. They will go off and live like monks, or they will go and live in a cave or something of this kind. Making a sacrifice, you see, giving up the way of the world in order to achieve a higher spiritual reality. And they think that by doing this, they are somehow going to resolve the mystery, you see, this problem. Well, of course, there are several difficulties with this. First of all, if you think like this, you are really abandoning your own responsibility for the welfare of the world in general. Now let me take the example of a rich person who has a lot of money. Let's say I am this person. I am not, but let us say for the sake of argument that I am this person. So I decide to give my money to the poor, and I just hand it over to the poor. What are the poor going to do with this? Well, they probably don't know. It may be very unclear who the poor are. How do I get this money to them? Do I give it to an agency? Do I say, well, here you are, you take this money, you distribute it to the people you think need it most? That's probably the best thing to do if you want to do this kind of thing. But you have no control over this. You're in effect just handing it over. But what you are handing over is not just your resources, but it's also your responsibility that you are handing over. You are not going to do anything for these poor people. You're just going to throw money at them, money that they have never had, money that they don't really understand how to use, and in a short space of time, most of the people who get money like this have lost it. It's very common. We see this all the time. How poor people, for example, might win a lottery, and they get a lot of money on the lottery, and they think this is wonderful. But it doesn't take long before that money disappears because they don't know how to use it. They don't know what to do with it. You who are the rich person, I don't know why you are rich, but let's say you are rich because you have made this money yourself. You understand about money, you know how to get it, and so on. You have a gift in this way. Would it not be better if you used your money, responsibly? Don't give it away, but invest it, use it properly for the benefit of others. Recognize that not everybody has this gift, not everybody has this ability, but you can do this and you can help people, not by sacrificing in this way, but by investing, by using something for the right purpose and in a sense improving things. Well, of course, that is also possible, and from the Christian point of view is a better solution. And yet when we look around, we see very often how difficult it is to adopt this. Let us look, for example, at temples and buildings that people have put up to the worship of other gods, even sometimes to the worship of the Christian God. And they fill these temples with gold and silver and lots of very precious things, which they think are signs of adoration, signs of worship to the God to whom these things are being sacrificed. But in effect, what is happening is that these items, this gold, this silver, or whatever, is just taken out of circulation. It's taken out of the market. It's not actually doing anybody any good at all. And we find very often, if you go to very poor places, very poor countries in the world, there will be a beautiful temple or beautiful church in the middle of the village, and everybody else is poor. Everybody else is poor because they are sacrificing to this God. You see, they are giving everything to that instead of using the resources that they have in a way which is constructive. Now, as I say, the idea behind this, the idea that you are sacrificing in order to improve yourself, in order to be better, may seem good, it may sound good, and it may be intended for the right purpose. I'm not criticizing this, but the people who do this are in fact doing the wrong thing for the right reasons, you might say. The other problem with sacrifice of this kind is that it is never adequate, it is never total. We see this in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. The Old Testament contains many examples of sacrifice, many laws governing sacrifice, because God told his people Israel that if they sinned in a particular way, then they must offer a particular kind of sacrifice in order to pay for that sin. And there was a whole system by which this was worked out in the law of the Old Testament. Now, what God was doing, of course, with Israel was teaching them that sin is bad, that sin must be paid for, that sacrifice is necessary. And so by illustrating this, you see, by saying, well, this sin requires that sacrifice, you could build up a whole structure here. And that is what happened in the temple. You see, in the temple at Jerusalem, there was a complete system of worship, a system of sacrifice, which was designed to deal with the individual sins of the people. But of course, as we pointed out, it was never a definitive solution, because you would pay for one sin at one time, but then you would sin again, so you would have to go back and pay with another sacrifice for another sin. So there was never any end to this. You see, it would always carry on 1 year to the next. There was also the problem that you don't always know whether you've sinned or not. You see, we sin in ways that we're not always aware of. So we may not make the sacrifice. We may think, well, it's not necessary, I haven't sinned. But you have, and so there is no, you aren't making the sacrifice, so you're not paying for the sin that you have committed. That's another problem. Another problem, of course, and the most serious, is that nothing we sacrifice is adequate to meet the demand of the sin itself. You see that that our sinfulness has cut us off from God. It has brought about spiritual death. There is nothing we can do to put this right. The only thing that can happen is for us to die. You see, the only way I can really pay for my own sin is to die. But if I die, that's the end of me. So what's the point? You see, I can't be saved. I can only be destroyed in this way. Now you may say, well, that's the answer, and perhaps it is, if that's the way you think. But of course, if I do this, you see, if I make the sacrifice which is adequate to meet the demands of my sinfulness, then it is counterproductive. It defeats the whole purpose. I can't do this. I can't be saved in this way. And this is why, of course, God sent his Son into the world in order to die for us. Because Jesus Christ, who did not have any sin, took your sin and my sin on himself. He took your place and my place on the cross. He died for you and for me. He paid the price. Why? Because he could pay the price. He didn't have to die for himself. So he chose to die for you and me instead. He could do this because he was God in human flesh. You see, he had the power, he had the ability to do for you and for me what you and I cannot do for ourselves. And so, because of that, you see, you and I are set free. We don't have to sacrifice in order to save ourselves. We have been saved by the only one who is capable of doing this. We don't have to destroy ourselves in order to be saved. But, of course, there is another thing here. The Apostle Paul tells us in Romans chapter 12 that we are to present ourselves, we are to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. Now, this is a very strange concept, because normally sacrifice involves death or involves some kind of loss. But the sacrifice that we make as Christians is the opposite. We are called to be living sacrifice. We accept this principle. Yes, we do. But when I sacrifice myself for God, I do not destroy myself. I become the person that I am meant to be. You see, I die not in myself, but in Christ. Christ who has died for me. The Apostle Paul said, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ in me. You see, he lives in me, giving me the power and the incentive to sacrifice myself. But the sacrifice of myself is actually the release of the spiritual power in me, given to me not by my own nature, but by the Holy Spirit who comes to live in my heart. It is setting this power of the Holy Spirit free to use me for good, to use me as a witness for him in the world. So that the purpose of the sacrifice is not to destroy, it is not to isolate, to put aside and not use for anything. It is rather the transformation which brings about the right use of all the things that I am, that I have, that God wants me to be. So this is the Christian answer, if you like, to this. Yes, we believe in sacrifice. Yes, we say that it is central to our spiritual regeneration, to our spiritual birth. But this sacrifice, the bad side, the taking away of sin, this has been done by Jesus Christ, you see, something that I cannot do for myself. but because he was God, because he rose from the dead, because he sends his Holy Spirit into my heart, it gives me something that I would not otherwise have. I can sacrifice myself, but in sacrificing myself, I become a new person in Christ, and I do what he wants. I do what is right in his eyes. Well, we've come now to the end of the first section of this lecture, and we're going to have a little break right now before carrying on with the second part. Thank you very much. Back, everybody. We're now going on to the second section of our second lecture, which is to do with the religions and philosophies of this world. I was talking just now about the whole concept of sacrifice, which is, of course, fundamental to so many religions around the world. But another thing, which is perhaps just as important or even more important for many people, is what we call morality. That is to say, a code of behavior, a code of conduct. Of course, this code of conduct is connected to the notion of sacrifice. People who do not follow the code of conduct, who do not obey it in some way or other, may find themselves having to pay a price for this, and that is the sacrifice that they have to make. So the two things are connected. But I think in many cases, the moral code, the notion of the moral code, is more general than this. Sacrifice tends to be connected with particular sins, with particular failures, whereas morality is a more general thing, a thing that has to be implemented in different ways at different times. If I take, for example, a simple thing, the Christian command to love your neighbor as yourself, that is a very good principle to have, but how do you live it? How do you practice it? What does it mean? This is something that you have to work out as you go through life. There isn't a fixed formula which tells you how to do this. You learn as you go along, and it will be different. It will have a different result in different cases. Different people will work it out in different ways. So in this sense, it is a more general thing. But just about every religion, and indeed every philosophy, has some kind of moral code attached to it. Now, this moral code may vary enormously from one system to another. Let me give you an example taken from the Bible. In the Bible, it says in the Old Testament that the law of God is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. In other words, if somebody hurts you, if somebody harms you in a particular way, you are entitled to take revenge in a similar way. You are entitled to compensation, which equals the harm that has been done to you. Now, in some ways, of course, that is a good principle, because the people who heard that for the first time probably did not think like that at all. They thought, well, if somebody takes my eye out, if somebody blinds me in one eye, then I can go and kill them. So I will react in too great a way. I will exact more revenge than is necessary. And the original command, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, was designed to limit the damage. To say, well, you can't just do that. You have to stop somewhere. And all right, there is a just compensation to which you are entitled, but no more than that. You can't go further than the damage which has been done. This principle, of course, is now generally worked out in a different way, because if you are injured in some way like this, you can seek compensation from whoever it is who has injured you, but usually this compensation will be in the form of money or something like that. Certainly it will not be inflicting more damage on the person concerned. You see, so we have kept the principle, the underlying principle of compensation, but we have translated it, if you like, into a different form. We have made a different understanding of this because we don't want to be so crude as they were initially. The underlying idea is there, but we work it out in a different way. There are, of course, other systems which do not respect this kind of compensation, which think that you're perfectly entitled to kill somebody who has harmed you. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it may even be recommended because if you don't kill your enemy, the enemy will come back and strike you a second time. So in order to avoid that, the best thing to do is eliminate your enemy from the beginning. And people who are brought up with that idea see nothing wrong with this. You see, to them that is not immoral to go and kill an enemy in this way. Then, of course, there may be other things which come into play. There may be systems whereby the people or tribe or something is expected to show deference to some power or some belief that they share, but which is not immediately obvious. For example, they will do things in order to please the ancestors. They believe that the ancestors are there, the ghosts of their fathers are watching them, and so the way they live, the things they do, are geared to keep them happy. And how do you know whether they're happy or not? Well, there's usually somebody, a priest or someone of this kind, a wise man, who claims to have special knowledge in this way. Now, there may not be very much logic in a system like this. How do you know what the ancestors are going to think, and would they do the same thing as they expect you to do? There's no objective way of demonstrating this, but a number of people believe this kind of thing. You see, they think this in their minds, and so they have created a morality of their own. Now, when this happens, when you are expected to follow a principle or a series of principles that are not immediately obvious. You see, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that's clear. You see, that's compensation. But if you are going beyond that to something less visible, less obvious, how are you going to know what to do and when to do it? And as I've already pointed out, it's the way that this is channeled very often, the way this is organized, is that a priest or a group of wise elders or somebody claiming some kind of authority, moral authority, will come in and direct you as to what to do next. You see, how to go about this. And this is often the way in which a religion or a philosophy or even a system of government starts. You see how people get involved in this because of somebody who has come along and said, well, try this, do that, and this will help to put things right. The trouble, of course, is that as with everything else that comes out of the human mind, this is just guesswork. How do we know whether we've done enough? You see this happening sometimes. For example, you get people who are suffering because there is a plague, let's say, in their village. So there's a plague in the village. The wise man or somebody says, well, sacrifice animals or do something, like this, and the plague will go away. So the people do that, but the plague does not go away. In fact, the plague may get worse. So what do? Well, you try something else, you see, and then the plague may or may not go away. And you keep trying until you get the result that you want. Sometimes, as I already pointed out with gambling, the example I gave from gambling, the answer, the solution proposed might work the first time. It might work on one occasion, and the plague does go away after some ritual or sacrifice has been made. But then the next time it doesn't work. So you're kind of left in a difficult situation. You don't know whether the power to whom you are sacrificing, the power which is in control of this, you aren't sure whether you are doing the right thing. And so this becomes a crisis. This becomes a problem of your conscience. How do you behave? What do you do? How can you hope for some kind of forgiveness, for some kind of relief from the problems that you are suffering? What is the answer to this? And gradually, as I say, over time, people have worked this out, sometimes in very complicated ways, and producing very complex and sophisticated codes of behavior, which we call morality. Now, many of these codes are similar in different parts of the world. Let me give you an example. The Ten Commandments. If we take commandments like you shall not kill and you shall not steal, most moral systems will contain some element of this kind. They recognize that killing people, stealing from people, being jealous of people, and things like this are not good ideas. But when you ask yourself, why are they not good ideas? The ultimate reason, the ultimate cause behind this is usually what we call self-interest. You see, it's not a good idea for me to go around killing people because sooner or later someone might kill me in retaliation. It's not a good idea for me to go around stealing from other people because sooner or later somebody will come and steal from me. So in order to protect myself, in order to have a peaceful life myself, it is better for me not to do these things. You see, not to do to another person something that I would not want them to do to me. That is a very common way of thinking. Of course, Christians agree with this in a way, but it's interesting that whereas most moral systems put this in the negative, in a negative form. They say, don't do to somebody else what you don't want them to do to you. The Christian response to this is, do to somebody else what you want them to do to you. In other words, they put it in a positive way, a positive light. Not just avoid things, but actually do something. You see, go out and do something. And of course, the motivation for this is not really, well, it may, to some people, it may seem to be self-interest, but it's not necessarily that at all, because I may be doing something good for somebody else, whether they respond in the same way or not. You see, that's not the issue. The question really is, am I at peace with myself? Am I doing something which I recognize in my own self as the right thing to do, whether the other person does it to me or not? I'm not afraid of them. I'm not trying to buy them off. I'm not trying to protect myself against their revenge. I'm simply doing what I'm called to do because it is the right thing to do. And it is the right thing to do not so much because of that person, but because of God. Because Christian behavior, Christian morality, is not a way of living with other people to protect ourselves. It is rather a way of living with other people that manifests the will of God for myself and for them. We bring that dimension in, and that, of course, changes the whole way that we think about this. And a problem, you see, with a religious code, a code of morality, is that it tends to be inflexible. It's difficult. We see this in the New Testament. We see this in the teaching of Jesus. Because Jesus was faced with a situation among his own Jewish people where there was a very strict and very well-known moral code. You see, there was certain type of behavior which they were agreed about, that they did. And one of the most important things, was that they respected the Sabbath day, the day of rest, the day which was set aside for the worship of God. But they were so strict about this that even doing good things on the Sabbath day was regarded as wrong. You see, when Jesus healed people on the Sabbath day, some of those who saw this thought it was a sin. Why was it a sin? Because it went against the moral code. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day, even if you're healing people, even if you're doing something right and good in itself. In other words, there was no way of judging, no way of deciding what things are better than other things. And Jesus had to try to teach people this. And you see that it's fine to observe the Sabbath day. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are other principles which are more important. And saving people's lives, for example, is more important than keeping the Sabbath. I mean, this kind of thing may not happen to us very often, but let me give you an example. If you see somebody on the other side of the road from where you live who is being attacked, or being robbed, say, and you don't know what to do, do you go out and try to defend that person, the victim, or report the victim? Or do you say, well, I can't cross the street because the light is red. You know, there's a red light and you're not supposed to cross the street when the light is red. So I'm not crossing the street, and the poor person who's suffering on the other side, that'll just have to wait until the light turns green. Well, you can understand the logic of this. You see, yes, you're not supposed to cross the street on a red light. It could be dangerous to cross the street on a red light. We know this. but what is the more important thing to do? And you have to have a flexibility in your understanding, which is not to destroy the code, is not to break the law deliberately, for the sake of breaking the law, but which is to understand that sometimes there are more important considerations that come into play, and we have to put them first. To have in yourself a spiritual awareness which teaches you when the law is to be observed according to the letter, and when the law has to be transcended, shall we say. I mean, you're not going to advocate that red lights should be abolished or anything like this. You're not saying that. But you cannot keep the letter of the law because a more important principle is at stake. And if you are subjected to a moral code, having this flexibility can be very difficult, even impossible, because you are just following the orders. You see, you have orders which are given. You are doing what you are told is the right thing to do, and to step out of line in any way in this respect is going to cause trouble. It's going to cause problems one way or the other. And so we don't want that. You see, we don't live like that. So this is a problem. You see, the question of morality, religious codes. But having said that, morality is popular. People like it for various reasons. First of all, most moral codes, most things that people advise us to do, basically are good advice. I mean, I've just mentioned about not killing people, not stealing, and so on. I mean, this is a good thing. I mean, people are recognize this, and you should give a certain amount to the poor. You should do different things. Most moral ideas, most moral suggestions are good advice. It's a good thing to do, and people recognize that, and so they accept it. You see, they say, well, life is not perfect. We can't always achieve the perfection that we want, but we try. You see, we do what we can in order to help things move along. It also is very helpful and comforting to people to feel that we've achieved something. You see, if I give, say, to a charity, I give so much money and so on, because it's a good thing to give to the poor, I can say to myself, well, I've done a good deed. You see, I've done something good. And there are some people who think like this. You see, they calculate the good deeds that they have done and say, well, I helped this person do this, and I told this person that, and there's a good feeling. You see, if you make somebody else happy, if you help somebody else out of a difficulty, and so on, you say to yourself, well, that's a good thing. Life is better because of this. And of course it is. We agree with this. And you often, find that governments in particular want to encourage this. You see signs up saying things like, help somebody in need. If you see somebody having a problem, go to their assistance. Be a responsible citizen. Show that you care about other things. And in theory, in principle, of course, these are all good things. And I would certainly not want you to think that I think that it's wrong to do this. I don't. I think it's a good thing, it's a right thing, and when we get the opportunity to do it, we should do it. But, of course, it's not really solving the problems of the world. It's not really getting to grips with the spiritual difficulties that we have because of the way that we have fallen away from God. It's very hard to answer for other people. If I help somebody out of a difficulty that they have, I cannot judge whether that is effective, whether that is a good thing. I really don't know. But what I do know is that I might say to myself, well, I've done a good thing today. I've done something good. That's good. I'm okay. I don't have a problem. I can look God in the face and I can say to God, I've done your will today. I don't really need to go any further than that. You see, I've done what you require. I've done the necessary thing. Now, if I start thinking like that, then I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble because I think that I am saving myself. You see, I think that by doing these things, good and right and proper as they are, that somehow I am getting closer to God, that somehow I am earning my salvation. And therefore, of course, what is really happening is that I'm falling into pride. You see, I'm falling into pride because I think I can do it. There's that wonderful story, well, it's actually a very sad story, but it's a wonderful story in another way, in the Gospels, of Jesus who meets this young man who is very rich and who is very moral. He goes to Jesus and says, I've kept the commandments all my life. I've done all the right things in my life. And what more do I have to do? What do I need to do to be saved? And Jesus looks at this man and he says, go and sell everything that you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. But the man wouldn't do that. You see, Jesus had put his finger on the weakness of this person. Yes, he'd done all the right things, but he had defined for himself what the right things were. He had organized his life in order to be able to do what he thought was good and to gain some kind of credit for this. Jesus also had to face people who looked at the commandments that they had received, but who found ways of keeping them in one way, at one level, but actually denying them at a different level. The example we have, the commandment to honor your father and mother. And there were people who did this, or so they thought, by making a gift to the temple. They said, well, I'll give some money to the temple in honor of my father and mother, and that's enough. I don't have to go any further than that. Whereas, of course, in reality, honoring father and mother, especially in those days, usually meant taking care of them in old age. Now, if you gave money to the temple in order to avoid taking care of your parents in old age, this was not obeying the commandment. But you were doing a thing which you could persuade yourself. You could say to yourself, well, I'm doing a good thing, but I'm just not doing what the commandment really requires. You see, it's a good thing at one level, but it doesn't really get to the heart of the problem. And this is something that we always find with morality. We cut it down to our size. We make it fit what we are prepared to do. We interpret it in a way that suits us, you see, in a way that we can achieve. And so we think we are doing the right thing, and we are fooling ourselves because actually we are building up a mountain of pride in our life, which is cutting us off from God. You see, by thinking that we are serving God in effect, we are not. Now, we can understand why people do this, because sometimes the demands of morality are very, very great. I've just given you the example about looking after parents. It's not an easy thing to do. Having your parents as your responsibility for many years in some cases. It's not necessarily just for a few hours or a few days, but it can be for many years, can be very taxing, it can be very demanding and very difficult. And so while we know it's the right thing to do, we're looking for an escape always. We try to find ways of saying, well, I don't have to do what is really required, because what is really required is too much. You see, I can't do this. Now, this, of course, is true. It's true because if you push morality to its logical conclusion, then you cannot do it. The sinfulness which is inside us, the wrong which is there, not only in us but in the whole world, is too great. You see, morality can cover things up. It can make a bad situation a little bit better, maybe, you see, by channeling it, by organizing it, by trying to ensure that it doesn't get any worse. As I pointed out at the beginning, the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, was originally intended to limit the damage, not to make things worse. So this is a good thing. This is a positive thing. We can understand this. And we're not going to object to that. But it doesn't solve the problem, because the problem will still be there. It will still come out. Why? Because ultimately, underneath, the problem is spiritual. I've mentioned before, very few of us have ever killed anybody, but if we have bad thoughts in our hearts, that's just as bad. And yet, you can go around boasting that you've never killed anybody, and yet thinking in your heart very bad things about other people. And so in practice, in effect, what you are doing is just as bad in the eyes of God, but nobody sees it. Nobody knows it. You see, from the point of view of other people, you look as if you are a good person leading a good life, but in reality, there's a whole world of sin, a whole world of evil in your heart. At the bottom, at the root of this, morality is an invitation to hypocrisy. It is an invitation to pretend that everything is fine on the surface, but not inside. It is a way of saving face, we might say. See, people have got to you want people to look at you with the right attitude. You want other people to have a good opinion about you, whether that good opinion is deserved or not. And so saving face becomes more important than doing the right thing. You're not really getting to grips with the underlying problem. You are just covering it over. The Bible calls this hypocrisy. It says that you are not living up in truth to the principles that you profess and that you want, to the things that you want other people to see. You want other people to think you are a good person, but in actual fact you are not. And hypocrisy is one of the worst sins. It is a sin almost as bad as idolatry, perhaps even worse in certain cases. Why? Because it is pretending. It is not truth. You see, it is false. And sooner or later, somehow or other, this will be exposed. And it's particularly serious in religious people, because one of the worst accusations that people make, and they make this against Christians as well as others, they say we are hypocrites. They say we preach one thing, we say one thing, but we do another. Well, this criticism is by no means always true, and I'm not trying to justify it in any way like that, but I'm saying it is a danger that we have to face. It is a problem that affects us, and we need to get to grips with it. We need to try to understand it so that we can avoid the consequences of it. Hypocrisy is not to be encouraged in any way, shape, or form. Now, moving on from this, you see, from these general principles, let us look at some particular examples. And I want, for the rest of this lecture, to concentrate on the morality and philosophies that existed in ancient Greece and Rome. Now, you may think these are very remote from our concerns today, but they were problems, they were factors that confronted the early Christians. The early Christians had to deal with these things, and so they had to formulate the gospel, they had to formulate their understanding of truth in a way that would counteract the falsehoods, the false teaching which they found around them. And the basic thing, the basic problem, is that in the ancient world of Greece and of Rome, religion and philosophy were understood to be two completely different things, and that they were opposed to one another. Now, this idea, which, as I say, may seem very remote from us today, at least the place where it originated seems remote to us today, is actually very common in our modern world, because there are many people today who preach a philosophy. Communism is a philosophy, for example, and religion is regarded as the enemy. You know, that people who are religious are opposed to our philosophy, and the two things do not match. You can't have both. You either follow a philosophical belief of a certain kind, or you practice a religion, but the two things are not compatible. And in a well-ordered society, the religion should be thrown out. This was the belief of the Greek philosopher Plato. You see that religion had no place in his ideal society. And in this respect, Karl Marx, for example, was a disciple of Plato. He followed this particular belief. And so it is not so strange to us than that we might think. What was the problem? You see, why did the people think this? Well, they thought this because to them, religion was something primitive. It was something crude. It was something that the peasants did, that they were superstitious. You see, they thought that gods lived in water or in fire, or if there was an earthquake, that was some god who had intervened. They had a very simplistic approach to natural phenomena. You see, they saw this as a divine power which was affecting them. And people who were intellectuals, people who thought, said this is irrational. If a fire comes from God, why does it burn good people as well as bad people? I mean, the fire doesn't care. We have a virus. The virus attacks good people as well as bad people. The virus does not have moral principles like this. So how can you say that it's some kind of divine action, some kind of divine punishment? And so these people, the intellectuals, became philosophers. You see, they became people who went in search of religion, went in search of a solution to the problem of religion. Well, in a sense, of course, you can understand why. That they were right to react against the primitive, superstitious cults that they saw around them. But the solutions that they proposed were not necessarily any better, because they got the wrong idea. Now, Plato and those like him knew that material things, material objects, could not either explain or solve the problems of life. In this respect, Plato was different from many of his modern followers who are materialists. This was excluded from his original idea. But the trouble with Plato was he had no idea of the spirit. You see, he could see that material objects, that stones and rivers, water, and so on, are not the answer to the human dilemma. You can't solve human problems like that. But he didn't have the notion that there was a spirit in the world. You see, this concept was missing in a sense. He did have a word for spirit, but spirit for him was the life force of the human being. It was a slightly different thing. No, what he believed, and what many of the philosophers who followed him believed, was that behind the universe was a great mind. What we call spirit, he would call the mind, the reason. You see, a mind. Let's just use that as the word. And this mind had ideas. And the ideas of the great mind were perfect. So that the great mind had an idea of a human being. You see, what a human being was an idea in the mind of the universe. Real people that actually exist, were corruptions of this idea. Why are we corruptions? Well, we are corruptions because we're all different. You see, I am a human being, you are a human being, but we're not the same. Why are we not the same? If we all come from the idea, you see, there's only one idea of a human being. So what creates the difference? Well, the difference comes because this power, this idea, has got to work on material things, in this case the human body. But matter, material objects, are evil. They're bad in themselves. So when the idea gets to work on matter, it produces something which is imperfect, you see, which is not correct in some way. And this is why we're all different. You see, I might be better at some things and you're better at other things, but nobody is good at everything because nobody is a perfect replica of this idea in the great mind. And so Plato says, well, how do you resolve this problem? Well, you resolve this problem by trying as much as you can to get away from the material reality in which you live, to rise above this. You see, what we call mind over matter. You see, the mind is more powerful than the material things which weigh it down. And so the more you give over to the mind, the more the mind dominates everything, the less important matter will be. And this will lead you, for example, to fast, to give up food, because food is for the body, the material body, and it interferes with the working of the mind. It will lead you to give up all kinds of things in normal life, because you're concentrating on ideas. You see, you're trying to think your way into a higher level of being. And of course, Plato believed that philosophers like himself were in fact higher people. They had improved. They were better than the average person. And so the result of this thing is what we call today idealism. And idealism is imposing a theory on reality. It's trying to make reality conform to a particular idea, to a particular theory. Now, there are some times and in some places where this has been very powerful. Let me give you just a very simple example. Look at a map of the United States. You look at a map of the United States, you will see that several states are geometric designs. They are rectangles or something like this. You see, they have been designed by somebody with a mathematical mind. They do not take geography into consideration. The lines drawn on the map pay no attention to rivers, to mountains, to natural barriers of one kind or another. They are just straight lines. This is mind over matter. You see, it is an attempt to impose a logical framework on a reality, on a geographical reality that does not conform to it. Now, this is the heart of the problem. This is not a solution. Because if you do this in your life, you see, if you try to impose a formula, even if the formula is very good and looks nice and so on, but you are trying to impose it on real life, you will find that sooner or later it will fail. You see, you cannot do this because you are applying to reality something that is not there in reality. It is a kind of fantasy. And this is why Christians say, no, these things do not work. When God wanted to save the world, he did not give us a lot of good ideas. He sent his Son into the world to live our life, to die for us, and to rise again. This is not just a thought in the mind, it is a reality in life. And that is what the Christian faith is all about. It is reality, not just an idea. And this is why we reject the philosophies of this world, because the philosophies of this world are ideas. Even if they're good ideas and right ideas, they may be very nice in many ways, they are nevertheless not the truth. Well, we've come to the end of our second lecture, and I hope that I've made myself clear, and I look forward to seeing you again for the third lecture, when we will look at this in greater detail. Thank you very much.